Chapter 1 Illusion of Control. The sun hadn't yet risen above the horizon, but the eastern sky was already softening from charcoal to pale peach. Down in the deep concrete canyons of the business district, the city still slept. Somewhere far off, a lone garbage truck hummed quietly, washing away the remnants of yesterday. For Max Lublin, standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of his 27th-floor apartment, it was simply another perfect morning. The apartment was executed in cool minimalism. Grey concrete, frosted glass, white oak. No clutter, no framed photographs, no dust-collecting trinkets. The space was organized exactly like his mind, nothing superfluous, everything in service of function. At 34, Max was a senior partner at Aegis Group. His job was to walk into multi-billion-dollar corporations, spot the fat, and cut it out without mercy. He still remembered last year's greatest triumph: optimizing logistics for the largest supermarket chain on the East Coast. 2 months of analyzing routes, warehouses, and shift schedules. His final report was a flawless mathematical model. Result? Delivery times cut by 8%, operating costs down 15%. 3,000 logistics workers received pink slips. Max bought this panoramic view apartment. He felt no guilt. He believed in numbers. Numbers didn't lie, didn't cry, didn't ask for personal days. Numbers were truth. His private mantra, etched into his subconscious. Anything that doesn't deliver direct value is wasted time. This total control had its ignition sequence. Its starter key. Morning coffee. Max turned from the window and walked to the kitchen island that looked more like an operating table. He wasn't a snob who could blind taste Ethiopian versus Colombian. The process mattered for another reason. It was a physical anchor, calibrating his brain. His daily reset before stepping into the chaos outside. It began with the beans. He opened the airtight canister, and the kitchen instantly filled with the dense, dark roast aroma, promise, energy, hidden power. He took out the digital scale, sensitive enough to register a breath. The metal bowl clicked softly onto the platform. 17.518 grams. Exact. Not a grain more. He poured the beans into the hopper of his hand-assembled grinder. One button press, and the low, guttural growl of steel burrs sliced the pre-dawn silence. That sound wasn't noise, it was the opening note of his day's symphony. The burrs turned hard beans into velvety, oily powder, releasing heavy notes of burnt caramel, dark chocolate, and the faintest wild cherry acidity. Then the water. Max used a gooseneck kettle. He set it precisely to 92 degrees Celsius, the temperature that extracted maximum flavor without scorching the oils. The relay clicked. Ready. He took his favorite ceramic mug, heavy, matte graphite glaze, polished smooth by thousands of identical grips. He set the dripper, placed the paper filter, rinsed it with hot water to kill the papery taste, dumped that water. Only then did he add the grounds. First bloom pour. 30 grams. The coffee swelled instantly, breathing out Max watched the dark mound rise, studded with tiny golden bubbles. For those 30 seconds he seemed to breathe in sync with the brew. Then the slow spiral pour, center outward, never touching the filter walls. A thin, steady stream gleamed under the kitchen lights. Absolute concentration. One wrong move and the water would channel through, leaving the taste thin and watery. Finally, the most important phase. 4 minutes of silence. Time for the last drops, now carrying the full soul of the beans, to fall into the mug. Usually, during those 4 minutes Max would carry the mug to the window and stand motionless. He would feel the pleasant weight of the ceramic, the rising heat sinking into his palms. He would watch the first rays repaint the skyscraper glass from dead black to blinding gold. Those 4 minutes were his buffer between sleep and the endless chain of calls, schedules, and decisions. They gathered him, focused him like a lens before it burns paper. But today the air in the apartment felt heavy, charged. At 11 o'clock he had the final presentation for Viridian's board, the tech giant that swallowed smaller competitors whole. This contract was his ticket to the major leagues. If he closed it, his equity stake would double. Max glanced at the wall. The large digital clock pulsed soft but insistent red. 6:15. His morning coffee ritual took exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes of silence. Today, with dozens of margin charts, EBITDA figures, and skeptical board faces swarming his head, those 12 minutes suddenly felt like an unforgivable, almost criminal luxury. He could spend them rehearsing answers to the CFO's trick questions. He could double-check slide 14, the one projecting Q2 profit growth. Efficiency versus habit. The central conflict of his professional life was playing out right now, on his own kitchen island, to the soundtrack of cooling water in the kettle. And for the first time in 7 years, efficiency won. Max clenched his jaw. "Fuck it," he muttered. He turned away from the scale and the grounds. He walked to the corner where the sleek chrome pod machine stood, the expensive toy Sarah once called a soulless coffee robot. Max usually kept it for guests. He grabbed a blank aluminum capsule, dropped it in, slammed the lever, pressed the button. The machine groaned, vibrated, and after 30 seconds of shrill hissing spat dark liquid topped with fake foam into the mug. Max downed the espresso in 2 quick gulps, right there at the counter. The taste was flat, acrid, burnt plastic chemical. Pure nervous system jolt. No calibration. No buffer. No magic. He had saved 11.5 minutes. Logic, his faithful ally, told him it was the mathematically correct decision. He had optimized the morning. Freed up resources. But when he turned to grab his leather portfolio, the silence in the apartment felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was a ringing, hollow void, as if someone had sucked part of the oxygen out. The red digits on the wall clock flickered strangely for a second, throwing a warped, broken shadow across the perfect white wall. Max blinked. The numbers steadied again. 6:17. "Just pre-deal nerves," he said aloud. His own voice sounded alien in the sterile cleanliness. He straightened his silk tie, shaking off the strange chill between his shoulder blades. He walked to the door and pressed the elevator button. Max was certain he had the situation under control. He had no idea he had just pulled the first stone from the foundation of his perfect day, and the whole building had already begun to tilt, slowly, imperceptibly. Chapter 2 System Failure. The underground parking garage of the luxury residential complex greeted Max with the hollow echo of his own footsteps. The air was stale, thick with the smell of damp concrete and expensive rubber. Max pressed the key fob. The soft, satisfied click of unlocked doors tore through the silence. His dark blue German sedan sat in its usual spot, reflecting the dim fluorescent light. Normally, getting into the car was the logical, seamless continuation of his morning routine. The vehicle was a hermetic capsule, an airlock that gently transported him from the sterile apartment into the adrenaline-soaked office. Max slid behind the wheel, and everything adjusted to him. The driver's seat, molded to his body down to the millimeter, accepted his weight. Climate control instantly delivered a perfect 21.5 C. The phone synced via Bluetooth, and exactly 3 seconds later the cabin filled with the confident baritone of the markets at Dawn Analytics podcast. It was his personal, perfectly tuned microworld. Max yanked the handle, dropped into the leather seat, and slammed the door. He tossed the portfolio onto the passenger seat, placed his smartphone on the wireless charger, and pressed the start button. The 3-liter engine purred respectfully. He buckled up, reached out by habit to raise the podcast volume. The cabin was dead silent. Max frowned. He stared at the wide media display. The message searching for Bluetooth device pulsed white on black. 3 dots appeared and disappeared, mocking him. "Come on," he muttered, feeling the first sharp edge of irritation. "Not today." He grabbed the phone. The Bluetooth icon glowed blue. He toggled it off, waited, toggled it on. The car kept stubbornly searching for a device that wasn't there. Max Lublin, a man whose time was worth hundreds of dollars an hour, was forced to sit in a half-dark garage and dig into system settings, frantically poking at cold glass. After 90 humiliating seconds, the speakers finally spat out a crackle, and the host's voice came through. But the baritone sounded metallic, flat, as if the man was speaking from inside a tin can. Max exhaled sharply through clenched teeth and peeled out of the parking spot. He merged onto the avenue. Because of the phone delay, he was 4 minutes behind schedule. 4 minutes in a megacity is a tectonic shift in traffic. The flow of cars today felt chaotic and ragged. People changed lanes without signaling, braked abruptly. Sunlight slammed straight into his eyes through the windshield with unbearable sharpness. Max lowered the visor, but the bright reflections still stabbed his retinas. The podcast host's voice began to grate. The numbers sounded like meaningless static. Max punched the steering wheel button, killing the sound. The silence in the cabin became oppressive. Up ahead, solid red brake lights. Gridlock. A solid, hopeless river of metal. A massive garbage truck blocked 2 of the 3 lanes. Max slapped the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The navigator helpfully blinked. Faster route found. Saves 12 minutes. Reroute. The algorithm offered salvation. Without thinking, Max tapped the green yes button. The thick blue arrow curved, suggesting he dive into the maze of narrow streets in the old industrial district. Max cranked the wheel right and plunged into the detour. By leaving his usual route, he had voluntarily surrendered another invisible anchor. Now he drove past peeling brick walls of former warehouses covered in graffiti, past cheap stores with metal shutters. There were no reflections of his expensive car in the panoramic bank windows. Here he was nobody. Just another vehicle in an alien, hostile landscape. The climate control suddenly went insane and blasted icy air into his face. Max tried to reduce the fan, but the touch panel didn't respond. And then it began. First, a light tingling in his fingertips. Then his breathing became shallow. It suddenly felt as if the cabin had catastrophically run out of oxygen. His chest tightened with a steel band. He tried to take a deep breath, but the air caught in his throat. His heart slammed against his ribs at insane speed. Heart attack. The panicked thought flashed. At 34, his vision narrowed to a tunnel. Max slammed the brakes, swerving onto the shoulder and nearly clipping an overflowing dumpster. He shifted into park, grabbed his shirt collar with both hands, ripped off the top button, and loosened the perfect tie knot. He gasped for air. It was a panic attack. The first of his life. He sat in his $100,000 car on a filthy shoulder in an industrial zone, completely helpless. His status, his bank account, his intellect, none of it could make his lungs simply inhale. The organism was rebelling against the broken system. Max managed to open the door and tumble out. His legs trembled. He needed water. He looked around. 30 meters away, under a faded awning, a neon sign blinked for an old 24-hour Minimart. On wobbly legs, Max reached the glass door and pushed. A cheap bell tinkled. Inside smelled of old linoleum, dust, and cheap detergent. The contrast between his custom Tom Ford suit and the greasy shelves was jarring. The cashier, a heavy man in a faded t-shirt, didn't even look up from his small TV. Max made it to the humming refrigerator at the back. He yanked open the door, letting artificial cold hit his face, and his gaze landed on the familiar glass bottle of classic Coke. The real thing. Something he hadn't touched since college, considering it liquid poison. But now his hand reached for it on its own. He slapped a crumpled 20 on the counter without waiting for change and stepped outside. With shaking hands, he twisted off the metal cap. There was a sharp hiss of escaping gas. Max took a huge gulp. The icy liquid burned his throat. Hundreds of sharp carbonation bubbles exploded against his receptus. A massive, uncontrolled sugar hit slammed into his bloodstream. It was chemical shock. Cheap, primitive, but incredibly effective. Max closed his eyes. The childhood taste of soda, its burning cold, acted like a hard system reboot. Sugar punched through the panic adrenaline. His breathing whistled but evened out. Heart rate began to slow. He took another gulp. The cold glass bottle in his hand felt like the most reliable object in the world right now. I'm okay, he told himself. Just a blood pressure spike. Not enough sleep. He finished half the bottle and tossed it in the trash. The familiar chemical taste lingered on his tongue. The illusion of control returned. Sugar and caffeine had built a fake shell of confidence. Max straightened his tie, got back in the car, and floored the gas. He was a machine again. He was back in the game. But that overconfidence was slow-acting poison. The 26th floor of the Orion Plaza glass tower was Max's kingdom. Usually his arrival felt like a captain stepping onto the bridge. He walked slowly, looking employees in the eye, checking the pulse of the team. But today, pumped full of artificial calm after the panic attack and sweet soda, he burst into the office like he was on fire. The presentation was minutes away. He strode through the open-plan space with a sharp, urgent gait. He didn't set the rhythm, he brought chaos. Slamming his office door, Max tossed the portfolio on the sofa and frantically powered up the computer. Fingers flew across the keyboard. He needed to catch up. In that blind rush, his eye caught the morning email from junior analyst Tom. Subject line: clarification on client growth schedule, minor edits. Max, feeling invincible after defeating the panic on the roadside, decided these were insignificant details. He had no time for minor edits. He marked the email read and closed the window. At 11 o'clock the Viridian board presentation began. Max stood before the giant screen. He spoke fast, maybe too fast. The sugar rush was fading, leaving a slight tremor in his hands. The team sensed the unnatural, taut vibration in their leader. They were nervous. Then came the Q&A. Viridian's CFO, a lean man with a piercing gaze, set down his pen and asked, "Mr. Lublin, how do your projections correlate with the new inflation forecasts we requested in yesterday's evening email?" A heavy, devastating silence fell. The air in the conference room could have been cut with a knife. Max felt a cold drop of sweat crawl down his spine again. The illusion of control he had bought with a glass bottle of soda burst. They hadn't incorporated that data. The model was built on outdated inputs. Max tried to improvise with general phrases. The board nodded politely, but their faces turned to ice. When the clients left the room with a non-committal "we'll think about it," Max knew the truth. The deal of the year was hanging by a thread. For 11 saved minutes and faith in algorithms, he had broken his team and nearly destroyed his own career. His phone vibrated. Reminder. 7 p.m. Dinner with Sarah. Avenue Restaurant. Max hit cancel meeting. The destruction mechanism could no longer be stopped. Chapter 3 Empty Transactions. Sarah was Max's complete opposite. If he was a man of spreadsheets, hard metrics, and predictable algorithms, she was pure element. Sarah was a ceramic artist. Her hands never seemed completely clean. Grey clay always clung to her knuckles, and glazed dust lived under her short nails. She lived on impulse. She could spend hours forgetting food and sleep to shape a single perfect cup handle, or suddenly drive out of town at midnight because the air smells like snow tonight. To Max this lifestyle seemed absolute, terrifying chaos. To Sarah it was the only way to breathe. They had been together just over a year. For this union of two polar worlds to survive, Max, as a true architect of systems, had introduced a rule. A schedule. Thursday, 7 p.m. Their sacred time. Joint dinner, reservation at a good restaurant, no work calls or messages. For Max, this dinner was a calendar slot guaranteeing balance in his personal life. Check the box, need fulfilled. For Sarah, it was the sacred moment, the only time in the week when Max stopped being senior partner at Aegis Group and became simply a man looking her in the eyes. But this Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Max sat in his office with his collar unbuttoned. Monitor screens glowed cold, reflecting hundreds of recalculated data columns. The Viridian disaster that had started with the ignored morning email needed fixing. He faced an all-nighter rebuilding the entire financial model to try to save the deal by morning. He took out his phone. The line rang for a long time. Finally a click, and soft jazz played in the background, her studio's usual music. "Hi," her voice was warm, slightly husky. He heard the smile of anticipation. "I'm just taking off my apron and trying to wash my hands. Are you already on your way?" Max rubbed the bridge of his nose, closed his eyes, and switched on his smoothest, most professional tone, the one he usually used to tell clients their stock had crashed. "Sarah, listen. I've got a crisis." The presentation went sideways. "I need to rebuild the entire dataset by morning. I won't make dinner." Silence on the other end. The jazz continued, but the silence between them became thick, tangible. Max, the smile vanished from her voice, replaced by dull, familiar exhaustion. "We agreed. It's our Thursday. The only evening. I know. But this is critical. It's about partnership, about my future at the firm. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Let's move it to Saturday. Anywhere you want. Pick the most expensive place. It's not about where we go, Max," she said quietly. There was no anger or hysteria in her voice, only deep, ringing sadness Max had never been able to decode. "It's that I need you tonight. Exactly tonight." She sighed heavily into the phone. "I had a terrible day. The kill thermostat failed. It overfired and ruined an entire batch of pieces. A month of work down the drain. I'm so tired. I don't need Avenue and oysters. Come to my loft. We'll order the cheapest pizza. I just want to sit next to you. Half an hour." Max's logic stalled. The gears of his analytical mind ground, trying to fit this sentimental impulse into the rigid timetable of a crisis night. Half an hour to her loft in evening traffic, half an hour there, half an hour back. 90 minutes of lost time on the night when every minute was worth hundreds of thousands in potential contract value. Sarah, you don't understand. I'm up against deadlines. Burned pottery is unfortunate, I get it, but pizza won't fix my project problems or glue your pieces back together. It's simply not rational. I'll call you tomorrow when everything's sorted. I'm sorry. He ended the call before she could answer. Somewhere deep beneath the thick layers of professional armor, a sharp stab of guilt pierced him. His system had failed, and he had hurt another human being. But as a good optimizer, Max knew. Any damage could be compensated, any breach patched, if you chose the right equivalent. Emotions were simply currency. He opened the Premium Concierge app on his phone. A couple of swipes and he ordered urgent delivery to Sarah's studio. An enormous bouquet of her favorite white peonies, out of season, astronomically expensive, and a box of handmade Belgian truffles from the city's best chocolatier. He attached the standard note. Insanely sorry I couldn't be there. Saturday is on me. Your Max. Pay button. Transaction approved. Amount charged that exceeded 3 days' earnings for an average person. Problem solved. Emotional deficit compensated by material asset. Max set the phone aside, felt the satisfaction of a closed task, and dove back into the columns of numbers. Around 2 a.m, after sending the final, comma-perfect file to the Viridian team, Max called a taxi and headed to Sarah's. He still had his key to her loft in the old textile factory building. He felt like a winner. Tired, but one who had saved the situation. He quietly turned the key in the lock. Inside it was dark and smelled of damp earth, glaze, and lavender. Sarah sat on the wide windowsill, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the sleeping city. She wore an old stretch t-shirt. She didn't even turn her head at the sound of footsteps. On the kitchen island, still in its cardboard shipping box, stood his luxurious bouquet. White petals glowed faintly, almost ghostly, in the half-light. The red ribbon on the truffle box was untouched. I sent everything, Max said, stepping closer and feeling strangely clumsy in his expensive, rumpled suit among the bags of clay. Tomorrow they'll review the report and be thrilled. I saved the deal, SAR. Sarah slowly turned her head. Her eyes were dry, but her gaze seemed to come from another galaxy. Thank you for the flowers, Max. They are very beautiful. And very, very expensive. I wanted you to smile. To know I'm thinking of you even when work is hell. That's the problem, she said softly, shaking her head. In that resigned softness there was more pain than in any outburst. You think my smile can be bought with expedited delivery. You think relationships are a balance sheet. You took my time on credit, paid it back with flowers. Sarah, I'm just trying to be rational. I had no choice. My future at the company was on the line. I couldn't drop everything for pizza. There's always a choice, Max, she said, sliding off the windowsill. Her bare feet made no sound on the wooden floor. She walked past him toward the bedroom. For you the numbers in the spreadsheet are more real than I am. You didn't miss a scheduled meeting. You missed us. She stopped in the doorway and looked at him over her shoulder. Tomorrow I'll pack my things. You need more space for your algorithms. I don't want to be a variable in your equation anymore. She closed the door behind her, not slamming it, just a quiet click of the latch. Max stood alone in the middle of the studio, surrounded by silent clay vases still warm from her hands. He stared at the perfect white peonies. The algorithm had worked flawlessly. Delivery on time. Logic was on his side. He had saved a multi-million-dollar project. So why, then, right under his ribs, had such a gaping, pulsing emptiness formed? He didn't yet understand that he hadn't just broken a meeting schedule. He had destroyed a ritual. He had severed the thin, invisible thread that had made them close. And no transaction in the world, no bank transfer, could buy the glue capable of joining it again. Chapter 4. Looking for software. A month passed. 31 days since that fateful Thursday when Max decided to save 11 minutes on his morning coffee. 31 days of methodical, merciless destruction of his perfect life. The Viridian deal collapsed completely. Despite the overnight model fix, the CFO stated that Aegis Group had failed to demonstrate proper process control. Losing a contract of that magnitude didn't just bruise Max's ego, it set his career back years. The equity stake that had practically been in his pocket went to another partner. Sarah, as promised, packed her things. She caused no scene. She simply vanished from his cold 27th floor apartment, leaving behind only the faint scent of lavender and an empty shelf in the bathroom. Max took the double blow the way he always took crises, as a system failure requiring immediate technical intervention. His brain refused to accept defeat, so Max began hacking his own life. He decided the problem was lack of control. He bought the latest smart ring that tracked pulse, sleep stages, blood oxygen, and body temperature. Now his mornings began not with the window and sunrise but with studying charts in the app. The charts were terrifying. The ring recorded chronic sleep deprivation. Deep sleep had shrunk to a pathetic 40 minutes. His brain refused to shut down, continuing even at night to build endless, pointless spreadsheets. Max struck back. He ordered premium nootropics from Europe, started popping melatonin by the handful, and installed a phone app that blocked all messengers after 10 p.m. But the organism is not a server. The harder Max tried to control it, the more fiercely it resisted. Food tasted like cardboard. Expensive steak chewed like rubber. Coffee, even the Turkish brew he had tried to return to, tasted of burnt bitterness and brought no joy. At the office he became unbearable. Stripped of leader status, he turned into a micromanager. He demanded reports every 2 hours, drove subordinates to nervous breakdowns over commas. The open plan office fell silent when he left his glass box. People didn't respect him, they feared him. He had become a function. An angry, overheating function. When Max caught himself staring at the flickering monitor for 20 minutes without understanding a single word, he admitted. His personal hardware was failing. Professional help was required. Dr. Alan Reed's waiting room smelled of white tea and expensive Italian leather. Magazines on the glass table lay in perfect stacks, and ambient music from hidden speakers was chosen to lower heart rate. For Max, it was simply another service provider. The service was called performance restoration. He had paid double for an urgent slot, viewing it as an investment in his own ROI. The frosted glass door opened silently. Dr. Reed, a man in his 50s in a perfectly fitted tweed jacket and thin-framed glasses, smiled gently. Max, please come in. The office was done in calm, neutral tones. The doctor indicated the soft patient chair, the place where people usually cried, complained about spouses, and unpacked childhood trauma. It was a well-rehearsed scenario, refined over years of practice. But Max didn't sit. He walked to the panoramic window, surveyed the city, then turned sharply and pulled a tablet from his portfolio. Dr. Reed, Max spoke quickly, staccato, as if briefing a board. We have exactly 50 minutes. I value your time, so I already sent your assistant a brief with my condition analysis exported from my tracker. Did you review the charts? Dr. Reed looked slightly taken aback. His smile faltered, but professionalism prevailed. He sank into his chair, laced his fingers, and rested them on his knee. A brief. Ah, yes. I looked at your tables. But Max, I'd prefer to hear it from you personally. Tables don't speak. How do you feel? Max brushed the question aside like an annoying fly. Feelings are non-quantifiable data. They interfere with analysis. We need to focus on the root cause of the system failure. Max tapped the tablet screen, bringing up a bright diagram. Point 1. Cognitive performance down 40% in the last month. Point 2. Disrupted circadian rhythms. Deep sleep phase absent. Point 3. Critical decision-making errors that led to loss of contract and breakup of personal relationship. He stepped forward and turned the tablet toward the doctor. The line on the graph plunged faster than stocks in a market crash. Note the red line. That's my efficiency level. The drop began exactly 31 days ago. I tried to compensate with rigid time management, but it only created negative feedback. My hypothesis: neurotransmitter burnout. Dopamine receptor depletion. I need stimulants or a hard pharmaceutical reboot protocol. What do you recommend? Ritalin. Microdosing? Dr. Reed sighed heavily. He removed his glasses and began slowly polishing the lenses with a silk cloth. Max, you're trying to fix a complex human organism as if it were a crash server. This need to control everything, to measure every second, Even in sleep it didn't appear yesterday. This perfectionism, this manic thirst for control, it's a defense mechanism. What are you so desperately protecting yourself from? Max frowned, not understanding where the doctor was going. I'm protecting my investments. My time. My career. My life, for God's sake. Let's dig deeper, Dr. Reed set the glasses aside and leaned forward, switching to a professional, soft whisper. Tell me about your childhood. About your relationship with your father. Did he often demand perfect results? Silence fell. Max stared at the doctor with genuine, crystal-clear bewilderment. What does my father have to do with this? He asked, and there was neither defense nor aggression in his voice, only complete incomprehension of the question's logic. Well, authority figures in early life often lay down patterns that, Doctor, I have an excellent relationship with my father, Max interrupted. We play squash once a month and discuss wheat futures. He taught me to diversify my stock portfolio before I finished college. What the hell does his investment strategy have to do with the fact that I stopped sleeping normally and lost my girlfriend? Dr. Reed blinked. His entire arsenal, Freudian psychoanalysis, attachment theory, childhood trauma work, shattered against the concrete wall of Max's pragmatism. Max genuinely did not understand why one would dig into the past when the problem had arisen a month ago from a scheduling glitch. Max, Reed began cautiously, realizing he was losing the patient. The psyche doesn't work by formulas. Perhaps you've lost connection with yourself. With your true desires. You need to look inside. Max looked at the tablet, then at the doctor. Disappointment showed on his pale face more clearly than any diagram. I see. You can't help me. You're a theorist. Therapy takes time. We've only just begun. I don't have time. Max almost shouted. He shoved the tablet back into the portfolio. The lock clicked like a pistol slide. This is a hardware problem, doctor, and you're trying to treat software. You're looking for the issue in 30-year-old text files when the critical crash is happening in RAM right now. He turned and headed for the door. Max, listen. Reed jumped up. If you keep going this way, you will break completely. Your heart won't hold, or your brain. You need to stop. You need to simply do nothing. Max turned back, gripping the cold metal door handle. His eyes were red from sleeplessness, and sharp shadows lay under his cheekbones. Do nothing is not a strategy. That's surrender. And I'm not surrendering. Thank you for your time. Send the bill to my assistant. He walked out, leaving the stunned psychotherapist in the perfect silence of his sterile office. Max descended to the street. It was rush hour. Yellow taxis, bicycle couriers, and clerks with takeaway coffee streamed past in a solid flow. The city lived its frantic rhythm. Medicine had proved powerless. Technology hadn't worked. Time management had driven him to the edge. Max Lublin stood in the middle of the noisy avenue, deafened by siren wails and human hum, and for the first time in his life clearly realized. He had no idea where to go next. All his maps had turned out to be wrong. Chapter 5 The Keepers when Max left Dr. Reed's clinic onto the noisy avenue, he didn't call a cab. His phone, usually exploding with notifications, lay in his pocket like a dead brick. He had voluntarily turned it off, as if cutting the umbilical cord that tethered him to the matrix. Medicine had proved powerless. Technology hadn't worked. Time management had driven him to panic attacks. Max Lublin stood in the middle of the city, deafened by siren wails and human hum, and for the first time in his life clearly realized. He had no idea where to go. Aimless walking for a man whose brain was used to plotting the shortest path from A to B felt physically painful. His feet carried him away from the glass skyscrapers of the financial quarter, deeper into the old historic districts where building fades were webbed with fire escapes and sidewalks narrowed. After an hour of such wandering he felt a strange, ringing quiet in his head. The panic had retreated, leaving only dull emptiness. He stopped in front of a narrow shop window. The glass was dusty, and above the heavy wooden door hung a faded brass sign with barely legible engraving. Elias. Repair and restoration of mechanisms. Inside, a warm yellow light glowed faintly. Driven by an inexplicable impulse, Max pushed the door. An old brass bell tinkled. The air inside smelled of machine oil, dry wood, wax, and something indefinably ancient. But the main thing was the sound. Hundreds, Thousands of ticking mechanisms merged into one complex, living pulse. Massive cuckoo clocks hung on the walls, bronze mantel clocks stood on shelves, and under the glass counter tiny gears and springs glittered. This ticking was strikingly different from the pulsing, soulless red light of electronic digits on his kitchen wall. There was deep, measured order in this sound. Behind the counter, bent over an antique pocket chronometer with a jeweler's loop in his eye, sat an elderly man in a leather apron. He didn't raise his head at the bell. Max stepped closer, watching the jeweler-precise movements of the tweezers. Are they running fast or slow? The master suddenly asked without looking up. His voice was soft, with a light European accent. Max was caught off guard. He reflexively glanced at his wrist. On it were Swiss watches worth a good car. A flawless mechanism. Mine. They're perfect. Half a second a year error. Master Elias finally set the tweezers aside, removed the loop, and looked at Max with watery blue, surprisingly clear eyes. The old man's gaze seemed to see straight through him, past the expensive suit and straight into the sleepless eyes. I wasn't talking about the piece of metal on your wrist, young man. I was talking about you. You look like a man whose inner spring is wound to the breaking point. One more tiny turn and it will snap, scattering the entire mechanism to dust. Max swallowed. The master's words struck with frightening accuracy, hitting the exact center of his pain. I lost control of my time, Max confessed, voicing his worst fear aloud for the first time. Elias laughed quietly, kindly. Lost control of time. You speak of it as if it were a dog on a leash that broke free and ran into the park. The master slowly rose from behind the counter. He took a bunch of thin brass keys from a hook and walked to the tall grandfather clock of dark oak standing in the corner. You people from the glass towers are constantly trying to measure time. You slice it into pieces, squeeze it, save it. You wear it on your wrist like handcuffs. Elias inserted a key into the dial. But time cannot be controlled. You cannot subdue a river. You can only respect it. The master began slowly turning the key. A deep metallic ratchet sounded as the spring wound. Elias's movements were smooth, almost ceremonial. He was not in a hurry. He did not glance at his own watch to see how many seconds the process would take. He was completely, totally immersed in this simple act. Every Friday at exactly 3 o'clock I close the shop door for 15 minutes, Elias said, moving to the next clock on the wall. I walk along the shelves and wind every mechanism by hand. Some require a special touch. The key must be turned with exactly the right force. No more, no less. Isn't it easier to buy electronic ones? Or self-winding mechanisms? Max's logic, though badly battered by life, still tried to resist out of inertia. You waste 15 minutes a day. That's an hour and a half a week. A huge loss of efficiency. Elias stopped and looked at Max with gentle sadness. Waste. My boy, that is the only time in the entire day that I actually gain. When I wind these clocks, I am not simply tightening a metal spring. I am reminding myself that I am alive. I am greeting tomorrow. Without that action, these beautiful mechanisms would become dead metal and wood. And without that time, I would become just a machine that repairs clocks. Max froze. The clockmaker's words struck him with unexpected force. I greet tomorrow. Max remembered his morning a month earlier. How he had drunk tasteless capsule espresso while staring at the blinking digits on the wall. He had saved 11 minutes. But he had not greeted the day. He had tried to hack it. Rob it. And ever since, his own inner spring had only wound tighter until it began to shred the gears of his life. Elias finished his round, returned behind the counter, and put the loop back on. Go home, young man. Take off those perfect Swiss watches. And find what wins you. Otherwise you will remain a broken mechanism in a flawless gold case. Max left the shop. The bell tinkled behind him. Dusk was falling. Street lamps began lighting one by one, casting long shadows on the asphalt. Max wandered along the wide alley bordering the central city park. People around hurried home, to bars, to meetings. They all ran along their trajectories, and Max clearly understood. He was no longer part of that movement. He sank heavily onto a wooden bench under a spreading oak. Around him lay small urban litter. Fast food wrappers, coffee cups, dry leaves. Friday evening left its dirty traces. Max looked at the chaos and felt a dull ache in his chest. His life right now looked exactly the same, littered with unsolved problems, broken connections, and shattered contracts. He was used to optimizing everything, but how do you optimize a broken soul? Suddenly his attention was caught by a rhythmic sound. Shush, shush, shush. The sound approached. Max turned his head and froze. A man in a bright orange safety vest over a thick, worn work jacket was walking toward him. A street sweeper. In his hands he held a wide broom on a long wooden handle. But what struck Max was not the vest. He recognized the man. It was the same old Mexican he had almost collided with at the doors of Orion Plaza that fateful morning when his first panic attack struck. The same old man to whom Max had tried to shove $10 for the right-of-way, and who had slipped the money back into Max's pocket. Max pressed himself into the bench. For most inhabitants of the glass towers, street sweepers were invisible functions. But now, stripped of his corporate armor, Max saw the human being. And how this human being worked. Shush, shush, shush. The Mexican's movements were not mechanical or lazy. There was a strange grace in them, a hypnotic dance. He swept the trash rhythmically, step by step, from curb to center, forming neat piles. He wore no earphones, smoked nothing, paid no attention to passers-by. He was completely, absolutely here and now. At the tip of his broom. The old man reached the bench. He stopped, swept an empty cardboard coffee cup from under Max's feet, and neatly deposited it in his dustpan. "Dirty evening, amigo," the old man said in a hoarse but calm voice, as if they were old friends who had parted only yesterday. Max nodded, still unable to believe the coincidence. Max searched for words. "You work like it matters to you. It's just trash. Tomorrow thousands of feet will pass and it'll be the same. What's the point of trying so hard?" The old man finally raised his head. In the yellow lamplight his deeply wrinkled face looked carved from dark wood. He leaned on the long broom handle like a pilgrim staff. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a crumpled unfiltered cigarette, lit it, and slowly exhaled smoke into the night sky. "Once in Monterrey, Mexico, I owned a trucking company," he said quietly through the smoke. Max raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Yes, amigo. I wasn't always sweeping other people's streets," the old man chuckled. "I had 40 trucks. I ran faster than all my competitors. I constantly optimized routes, counted gallons of gas and minutes of downtime. I was a very important man in an expensive suit. And at 42 my heart simply stopped right at my desk. For 3 minutes. He took another drag and looked at the glowing skyscrapers in the distance. When I woke up in the ICU, covered in tubes, no one was there. My wife had left a year earlier because I was always at the office. My children didn't remember me. I had nothing except the air the machine pumped into my lungs. I was a very efficient businessman, but I had become a dead man." The old man dropped the butt and carefully crushed it with the toe of his heavy boot. Then he swept it into the dustpan. "So I don't run anymore. Tomorrow will be tomorrow. If I think about the trash that will appear tomorrow, I'll go crazy with anger." He surveyed the freshly cleaned stretch of sidewalk that now sharply contrasted with the rest of the alley. "I don't just remove trash, Sarah. Trash is removed by a cleaning machine. I clean space. I prepare the ground for a new day. For the people who will walk here in the morning. Understand? If I do it just because they pay minimum wage, it's hard labor. But when I take the broom and tell myself, I am making this piece of the world clean, it becomes something else. It becomes important." The old man fell silent, looked at his calloused, work-hardened hands, and added a phrase that sounded to Max like a shot in silence. "Habit, amigo, serves only you. Your greed, your comfort, so you don't strain your brain. But what I do, it serves something bigger than me. This park. This city. The people. When I sweep, I am not a worker, I am the owner of this piece of earth for the next half hour. I bring order here. My own." Max felt goosebumps run down his spine. The old Mexican's words clicked into perfect puzzle pieces with the clockmakers. Habit serves you. Ritual serves something bigger than you. Max finally understood his fatal, fundamental mistake. All his perfect morning schedules, routes, sleep trackers, and graphs, they were only habits directed strictly inward. Toward his own efficiency. Toward his personal gain and ego. They had no connection to anyone or anything except his ambitions. When he had abandoned his morning coffee to save 11 minutes, he hadn't just broken a schedule. He had betrayed the only moment in the day when he was connected to the city, to the light, to the beginning of a new cycle. He had betrayed that order for personal hustle. And the world, in turn, had turned away from him. "Thank you," Max said quietly. For the first time in many months there was genuine gratitude in his voice, not the perfunctory politeness of a negotiator. The old Mexican only nodded slightly, touched the brim of an imaginary hat with his fingers, took up the broom again, and resumed his unhurried dance. Shush, shush, shush. Max slowly rose from the bench. Deep beneath the layers of despair and exhaustion, something strange, almost forgotten, began to stir inside him. He understood what he needed to do. Not optimize the mistakes. Not compensate the losses. He needed to go back and, step by step, restore the broken connections. Clean his space the way this old man did. But he had to start with the hardest part. With those he had long left behind. Chapter 6 Resistance of the Material. Sunday turned out cloudy. Low leaden clouds hung over the megacity, promising a long autumn rain. Max sat behind the wheel of his car. This time the cabin was silent. He had turned on neither podcasts, nor radio, nor even the navigator. He knew the road perfectly, the route he had taken less and less often over the last 4 years. The road to the quiet green suburbs, to his parents' house. Previously, weekly calls home or rare holiday visits had been just another task in his planner. Social connections, family, maintain. He would arrive, quickly eat mom's pie, talk investments with dad while constantly glancing at his expensive watch, and leave, citing important meetings. Physically he sat at the table, but mentally he was always somewhere else, among his spreadsheets and ambitions. Today everything was supposed to be different. He turned onto the street lined with old elms and parked beside the neat 2-story house with the white porch. The house where he had grown up. Max got out and climbed the steps. He hadn't called ahead. Social etiquette algorithms demanded advance notice so hosts could prepare, but now he was operating outside algorithms. He pressed the doorbell. Light footsteps sounded inside. His mother opened the door. She wore a house cardigan and held a kitchen towel. Seeing Max, she froze. Genuine surprise flashed in her eyes, instantly replaced by alarm. "Max. My God, son, did something happen?" She stepped forward, scanning him from head to toe as if expecting blood or wounds. "Why didn't you call?" In his mother's instinctive reaction, Max saw the full depth of his alienation. Her son arriving on Sunday unannounced, her first thought was that something terrible had happened. "Nothing happened, Mom," Max said quietly, feeling a lump rise in his throat. He did something he probably hadn't done since college. He simply stepped forward and hugged her tightly with both arms. She froze for a second in surprise, then her hands hesitantly, trembling, settled on his back. She smelled of vanilla and baked apples, the scent of absolute, unconditional safety that he had so diligently erased from his sterile life. "I just wanted to see you," he whispered. His father appeared in the hallway. He wore old corduroy pants and held the Sunday paper. Seeing the scene in the entryway, he removed his reading glasses. "Max, what brings you here?" He joked, but there was wariness in his voice too. "Market crash?" Max released his mother and looked at his father. "No, Dad. The market's fine. I came to see you." They moved into the small living room. His mother fussed, trying to set the table, still unable to believe this wasn't a short, functional check-the-box visit. His father, settling into his armchair, began the conversation from safe territory by habit. "I read the analysis on Friday. Tech index dropped." "Your firm, Dad," Max interrupted gently but firmly. He sat on the old, sagging sofa. "Let's not talk markets today. Or investments. Or my work." His father furrowed his grey brows, clearly thrown. "Then what are we supposed to talk about?" "About you," Max answered. "How's your knee? You said you were going to change doctors. And Mom, show me what you planted in the garden last week. You told me on the phone, but I was busy with a report and wasn't listening. Forgive me." A long, ringing silence fell. The parents exchanged glances. This Max, calm, unhurried, looking them straight in the eyes, was a stranger to them. But gradually the ice began to melt. They started talking. About the knee. About the new neighbors who played music too loud. about rose varieties that hadn't taken because of the cold spring. Max pulled his phone from his pocket, deliberately turned it off in front of his father, and placed it face down on the edge of the coffee table. He listened. For the first time in many years, he wasn't simply waiting for his turn to say something smart. He absorbed their words. With every minute of this unhurried, completely inefficient conversation, the invisible thread connecting him to his roots was being restored. This wasn't lost time. This was watering a dried-up tree. When Max was getting ready to leave that evening, his father walked him out onto the porch. A light rain had begun. "You know," his father said, hands in his cardigan pockets, staring at the wet asphalt. "I was always proud of your success. How fast you climbed. But we felt we were losing you. And today I'm proud for the first time in a long while simply of the man you are." His father gave him an awkward, masculine pat on the shoulder. "Come more often, son. And not only when you're in crisis." "I will, Dad. I promise," Max smiled. The first anchor had been dropped. But a far harder test lay ahead. The rain intensified, turning the city into a blurred smear of neon lights. Max stopped the car beside the old brick building of the former factory where Sarah's loft studio was. There were no luxurious bouquets or Swiss chocolates on the passenger seat. Only a modest paper bag from a nondescript Italian pizzeria on the corner and 2 cardboard coffee carriers. Max stepped into the rain, climbed the echoing metal staircase to the 3rd floor, and approached the massive iron door. He still had his key, but using it now would have been a crude violation of boundaries. He had to ask permission to enter. He knocked. 3 short raps. Silence behind the door. Then the lock clicked. Sarah stood on the threshold. She wore a clay-stained apron, hair carelessly gathered in a bun. Her face remained impassive, but her eyes held defensive coldness. She shifted her gaze from his face to the modest bag of pizza and coffee. "Last month you sent $300 peonies, Max." Her voice was quiet but sharp as a shard of ceramic. "Today, pepperoni pizza. Your algorithms crashed, so you decided to test a new apology script?" It was a fair blow. A month earlier Max would have started defending himself, proving he was right. But now he simply accepted it. "My algorithms burned out, Sarah," he answered in an even, calm voice. "I'm bankrupt. In every sense except financial. I didn't come to apologize. I came to be present. If you'll let me." She frowned, searching his face. "One cheap pizza doesn't fix anything. Tomorrow your deadlines will light up again, graphs will flash, and I'll become another slot in your calendar. You can't optimize relationships." "I know. I'm not optimizing anything anymore. I don't even have my phone." He patted his empty pockets. "Just let me in. Please." Sarah hesitated for a second, wrestling with herself, then silently stepped aside. The studio was lit with dim light. On the central table lay a huge, shapeless lump of grey, wet clay, a new batch waiting to be prepared. Max set the pizza box on the edge of the table. He didn't start conversations. Instead, he silently removed his expensive wool jacket and hung it on the back of a chair. He unfastened his cufflinks and slowly rolled up the sleeves of his perfectly white shirt to the elbows. Then he walked to the clay table. Sarah watched him, leaning against the doorframe, with an expression of complete bewilderment. Max Lublin, the man who had been afraid to dirty his shoes with city dust, now stood before a lump of dirt. He looked at her, waiting for instructions. "What are you doing?" she asked. "I want to help. You'll ruin your shirt. It costs half my rent." Instead of answering, Max plunged his hands into the cold, heavy mass. Clay slid under his nails, staining the cuffs. Sarah couldn't hold back a faint, shocked sigh. She slowly approached, stood beside him, and placed her hands, covered with dried crust, on his clean palms. Her touch sent heat through him. "It needs to be wedged," she said quietly, standing so close he felt the warmth of her shoulder. "You have to drive out all the air, all the bubbles. Otherwise it will explode in the kiln and destroy everything around it. This takes time. You can't rush here." Max nodded. They stood side by side in the half-dark studio, under the sound of rain hammering the windows, and together, in sync, kneaded the heavy clay. It was a monotonous, physically demanding action. There was no efficiency in it. There was no measurable end goal that could be entered into a report. But for Max, every movement of their hands was the most meaningful thing he had done in the past year. In this primitive, dirty process, the gaping hole inside him was beginning to close. "This is only the beginning, Max," Sarah whispered without taking her eyes off the clay. "It's a very long road. I won't forgive you in one evening." "I know," he answered, feeling the grey mud cover his hands. "And I'm not in a hurry anymore. I have all the time in the world." For the first time in his life, he was telling the absolute truth. Chapter 7 Return of the Alpha Monday morning was blindingly clear. The night rain had washed the dust and smog from the city, leaving fresh air that cut the lungs. Max stepped out of the elevator on the 26th floor exactly at 8:15. As before. But everything was different. There was none of the icy, panicky haste that had driven him forward on that fateful morning a month earlier. No desire to lock himself faster in the glass office and hide behind flickering charts. He entered the open plan space not as a function come to squeeze metrics, but as a man who had returned to his territory to restore order. The office hummed as usual in the mornings. After the Viridian presentation failure and the month of Max's micromanagement that followed, the atmosphere in the department was poisoned. A sticky fear of layoffs hung in the air. Seeing Max, employees hurriedly averted their eyes, shrinking into their chairs and pretending to be furiously busy. Max did not go to his office. He stopped in the middle of the central aisle, looked around, then slowly, calmly walked to the secretary's desk. "Good morning, Anna," he said, looking her straight in the eyes. Not through her, not over her head at the wall clock as usual, but exactly at her. "You look great." Anna, who was used to the boss only barking short orders in the morning, blinked in surprise. Her coffee cup froze in midair. "Gee, good morning, Max. You have 12 urgent emails. I printed the summary. Excellent." Let them wait on the desk. He smiled a real, non-automatic smile and moved on. He approached senior developer Steve's desk. Steve was nervously, almost convulsively hammering the keyboard. "Hey, Steve. How was the weekend? Did your son win that big baseball game?" Steve froze. His fingers hovered over the keys. He looked at Max with suspicion, trying to detect the catch. Max had never asked about personal life. Yeah. He won. 3-2. He hit the winning run. "Thanks for asking, boss." Max nodded and continued to the most difficult zone. The analytics department. The epicenter of their shared failure. Junior analyst Tom, the very one whose inflation correction email Max had ignored a month earlier, shrank when he saw the approaching boss. The entire past month Max had taken his anger over the lost contract out on him. The kid was pale. Max stopped at his desk. The entire open plan office fell silent. People stopped typing. The air could have been cut with a knife. "Tom," Max said calmly but loud enough for everyone within 20 meters to hear. The guy flinched. "I understand, Max," he began, stuttering and swallowing hard. "I'm already packing boxes. I should have made sure you read that email. I should have come to you personally before the presentation, Tom." "Stop," Max raised a hand. His voice was steady and deep. The guy fell silent in shock. "You don't need to pack anything." Max turned so the whole office could hear. "That wasn't your mistake. That was my mistake." A quiet collective sigh rolled through the office. The senior partner, the human machine Max Lublin, famous for his ruthlessness, had just publicly admitted his own incompetence. It shattered every corporate template. "I was too busy with my own illusory efficiency," Max continued, weighing every word. "I chased saved minutes and ignored your email. You did your job perfectly. I failed mine." Max surveyed the silent office. Dozens of wide eyes stared at him. "We lost the battle for Viridian." "That's a fact," he said, and his voice sounded like a real captain addressing his crew after a heavy storm. "But the reason wasn't the numbers, the rates, or Asian markets. The reason was that we stopped being a team. We became a set of isolated functions. I became a function. I tried to turn you into algorithms, and we broke at the first stress test." He paused, letting the words settle in the open plan silence. "Starting today, we changed the approach. No more rushing for the sake of rushing. No more optimization for the sake of metrics. We work together. And if anyone sees we are going the wrong way, they have the right to stop the process and say so. Including me." "Understood." The office was silent, digesting what it had heard. Then the head of analytics, standing by the water cooler, slowly nodded with respect. Understood, boss. The tension that had hung in the air for a month snapped like an overstretched string. It didn't disappear without trace. There was still plenty of work, but the animal fear was gone. In its place returned focus. Max had set the rhythm. He had won back his pack. Not through fear and microcontrol, but through honesty. He finally headed to his glass office. Entering, he did not rush to the computer. He walked to the window and for several long minutes simply looked at the city. The silence was broken by the ring of the landline. The caller ID showed the Viridian headquarters number. Max picked up the receiver. Lublin speaking. Mr. Lublin, the Viridian CFO's voice was dry, but without its former icy detachment. We spent a month trying to integrate your competitor's model. And how did it go? Max asked calmly. It's raw. And too rigid. At the slightest supply chain glitch it collapses like a house of cards. I know, Max replied. A year ago I built exactly the same models. They look perfect on paper but don't work in reality because they ignore the human factor. You can't optimize people down to robots. Sooner or later the system produces a critical error. That's exactly what happened to me at our presentation. A long, thoughtful pause on the other end. In the world of big corporations no one spoke so directly. Everyone looked for scapegoats or hid behind graphs. Honesty is a rare and expensive asset in your business, Lublin, the CFO finally said. I don't need perfect presentations. I need a system that will survive a crisis. You have 48 hours to provide us with a new concept. We'll do it in 36, Max answered, feeling a familiar but now healthy adrenaline flood his veins. The adrenaline of creation, not panic. And this time we'll account for every variable. I'm holding you to that. Until Wednesday. The line went dead. Max placed the receiver back. A real, confident smile appeared on his face. The mechanism was working again. But now it was not a soulless iron machine. It was a complex, living, breathing organism. And he, Max, was once again an integral part of it. Epilogue architecture of the Soul Tuesday morning. The sun had not yet risen above the horizon, but the eastern sky was already filling with light, turning from charcoal to soft peach. Max stood in his kitchen on the 27th floor. The digital clock on the wall showed 6 o'clock. Physically, everything was exactly the same as on that fateful morning a month earlier. The same cold minimalism of the apartment, the same breathtaking view from the panoramic window, the same echoing silence of the sleeping megacity below. But Max himself was a fundamentally different man. He was not looking at the red digits with a growing sense of panic over lost time. He was not replaying endless charts in his head, rehearsing phrases for clients, or calculating his margin. He was completely, totally here. In this second. He pressed the button on the steel grinder. The low, throaty hum sliced the pre-dawn silence. But now it was not simply the technical noise of a machine grinding organic matter. It was the first note in the symphony. The frequency on which he consciously tuned his spirit. The aroma appeared, thick, earthy, real. The smell of earth, fire, and human labor collected in tiny beans. Max took his favorite ceramic mug. The same dark one with the rough bottom. He felt its pleasant weight, its dense texture. He poured freshly ground coffee with water heated precisely to 92 degrees, watching the grounds breathe, releasing bubbles of air. And then they came. Those same 4 minutes. He walked to the window and froze, holding the hot mug with both hands. The first timid rays struck the glass of neighboring skyscrapers, scattering golden pollen across the sleeping city. Max watched this awakening, and the words of the people he had met during those long, difficult days sounded in his head with absolute, crystal clarity. Air isn't just to push blood through pipes. It's to sing. The old Mexican had been right. For years Max had tried to live his life as an incredibly efficient, high-tech pipeline pushing gigabytes of information, forgetting that inside him there should be music. I don't waste time. I greet tomorrow. Clockmaker Elias had shown him the main illusion of modernity. Control over time is a myth. Time cannot be accumulated, saved, or deposited in a bank account. The only thing a person can truly control is their sincere presence in the present moment. Habit serves you. Ritual serves something bigger than you. The street sweeper's words had become the master key that opened the lock of his cage. Exactly then, standing at the window with a cup of hot coffee, Max finally understood the fundamental difference. He understood the truth that humanity had intuitively known for millennia, but that his generation, the geniuses of optimization and productivity, had somehow lost in the endless chase for saved seconds. Habit is brushing your teeth on autopilot while scrolling the newsfeed. Habit is driving to work the same route simply to avoid extra decisions. Habit is drinking chemical coffee from an aluminum capsule to get a stimulant hit and save 11 minutes. Habit automates your life. It saves brain energy, but in exchange disconnects you from reality. It makes you dead while still alive. But what he was doing now, the way the old clockmaker reverently wound antique mechanisms, the way the Mexican sweeper, like a priest, cleansed a piece of sidewalk for a new day, the way he and Sarah, shoulder to shoulder, in silence kneaded heavy, raw clay, these were rituals. A ritual is not simply a verified sequence of actions. It is the architecture of the human soul. It is a deeply sacred act through which we declare to the universe and to ourselves, I am here. I exist. It is the gravity that keeps us from flying off into the icy, meaningless cosmos of everyday hustle. Rituals are the invisible, ancient language in which we speak with the world. When you have dinner with the person you love on Thursday, leaving phones outside the room, you are not simply consuming necessary calories. You are building a temple of your union. When you call your parents on Sunday, you are not simply exchanging household information. You are watering the roots of the tree on which you yourself grow. When you brew coffee at dawn and look out the window, you are not simply waiting for a drink. You are accepting a new cycle, entering into dialogue with the light, with the city, with the very fabric of time. When a person abandons rituals for the sake of mythical efficiency and speed, he does not win time. He falls silent. He loses the language. And the world, grown deaf to him, stops responding, beginning to fall apart into meaningless fragments of problems. Without rituals, a person becomes a ghost in his own life. Very fast, incredibly productive, rich, but absolutely empty inside, a ghost. A biological machine simply waiting for its system crash. Max raised the ceramic mug to his lips. First sip. The hot, slightly bitter liquid burned his tongue. It was not just taste. It was resonance. Warmth spread through his chest, filling the icy emptiness that had gaped there for a whole month. The sun had fully risen above the horizon, flooding his perfect apartment with light. But the apartment no longer seemed to him a sterile, cold box for overnight stays. It was filled with life. Max Lublin stood at the window. He was no longer a leader, no longer an optimizer, no longer a function. In this particular, sacred second, he was simply a living man drinking his morning coffee. And for the first time in his life, that was absolutely, infinitely enough. The end.